Get up! A violent shout and a stab of pain in his belly ripped the American Alexander. Out of darkness he curled on instinct. A dry whimper scraped out of his throat. Above him was not the familiar plaster ceiling of his New York apartment. Black and rotten beams crossed the low roof. Mold hung in the air with a gagging rank stink of blood, and filth was nothing like the exhaust and sharp bite of the modern city he remembered. He forced himself up in panic. In English he shouted, "Where is this? Who are you?" to the people around him. Those words sounded like a demon muttering. A dozen boys in blue-gray robes jumped back at once. It was like he was something filthy that should not be touched. They pointed at him and whispered and stared fear and disgust, twisted their faces. The sounds they spat out meant nothing to him, but the contempt in their eyes needed no translation. Someone yelled, "Yellow-haired ghost." Someone else hissed that he was an evil thing. Alexander glanced in terror at the muddy water. Fat beside him, a distorted face stared back. Bright blonde hair, deep blue eyes in this eastern world of black hair. In black eyes he looked violently wrong, like a strange beast that had wandered into a flock of sheep. A middle-aged deacon with a shadowed face strode, and he seized Alexander's wrist. With brutal strength he inspected him the way a butcher checks an animal before the kill. A stream of icy force punched into Alexander's body. It rampaged through his shriveled meridians. Pain crushed the breath out of him. Cold sweat poured down his skin. He almost blacked out again after a moment. The deacon flung his hand away in disgust. He pulled a handkerchief from his robe and scrubbed his fingers hard, as if he had just touched a plague. No spirit row. Tea. A useless scrap bone aptitude at the very bottom. The deacon's voice was colder than iron. It sounded like a death sentence. Not only is he strange to look at, he is not even qualified to be a furnace vessel. Throw him to the menial hall, make him clean latrines and ditches. Do not let him dirty the eyes of any outer sect disciple. He did not get a chance to argue. Two burly menials hauled him up like a dead dog. They dragged him through corridors of carved beams and painted rafters, upturned eaves, and soaring roofs drifted in and out of cloud and mist. The sight was breathtakingly beautiful, but to Alexander it carried a savage blood-colored glare. They threw him into a broken room where wind poured in from every side. The stink hit so hard he could barely breathe. Filth covered the ground. In that moment there was no romance about cultivation or living forever. Only freezing air slicing through the cracks like knives. Andrew curled on a cold stone slab bed. He stared out at a red moon he had never seen before. The pain kept him clear-headed. He had not come to heaven. He had fallen into a slaughterhouse with ranks stricter than hell, and he was the lowest prisoner here. So low that even breathing was treated as a mistake. A month was enough to turn Alexander from a stranger who only panicked and screamed into a silent, brooding observer across 30 days and nights. He barely survived between reeking ditches and icy shared bunks. He learned the basic common language of Juzhou. He also learned the only law that mattered here. The weak do not have the right to refuse. Today was the day the menial hall handed out monthly stipends. Those 3 low-grade spirit stones might be pocket change to others. For Alexander, who could not sense chi flow, they were the only key to open the chi drawing art and change his fate. He dragged his malnourished body to the very end of the line. One menial after another received spirit stones. Each one bowed low and thanked steward senior brother John K., who sat in the high-backed chair. When it was Alexander's turn, he held out both hands. His fingers were split by frost sores and stained with grime. His palms trembled. John K. flicked a careless glance at him. He rolled the 3 faintly glowing spirit stones in his hand. A cruel amusement curled at the corner of his mouth. "Give me." Alexander forced the words out in stiff Juzhou speech. His voice came out hoarse. "Give you." John K. acted as if he had heard a joke too big to believe. Several lackeys around him burst into loud laughter. John K. sprang to his feet without warning. He drove a boot into Alexander's lower belly. The force of a chi refining realm cultivator hit a mortal. Like a warhammer, Alexander flew backward. He slammed into the stone wall behind him. His organs felt like they shifted out of place. Agony tore through him. Blood surged up and choked his throat. John K. strolled over at an unhurried pace. His black cloth boot stomped down on Alexander's face. He grounded hard. It was like he was crushing a disgusting bug. "You are a blonde, blue-eyed barbarian. You still dare speak of cultivating immortality. The sect letting you live to clean latrines is already a mercy beyond your worth. Giving you these 3 spirit stones would be wasting treasure. I will keep them for you. Consider it payment for your ugly face, dirty in the sole of my shoe." The pain drilled straight through Alexander. His cheeks scraped the rough ground and burned like fire. Back in New York, this would have put a man away for years. Here, the only eyes on him held cold mockery. Alexander did not bow and beg like other menials. He did not waste breath on useless roaring. Through the mess of blonde hair, he locked his stare on Jonka's greedy, arrogant face. He swallowed this humiliation down with a bloody taste in his mouth. Jonka saw that the yellow-haired ghost did not cry. He saw that the yellow-haired ghost did not scream. He only felt that creeping stare and a sudden bad omen in his gut. He spat on the ground. Then he walked away with the spirit stones. Alexander lay alone on the icy mud, his body spasmed from the pain. Deep in those blue eyes, the last spark of civilized innocence went out. In its place rose the cold patience of a beast in this man-eating world. He learned his first lesson before fangs grow. Dignity is an epitaph carved for the dead only by staying alive. Can he claim everything? His belly bruise still throbbed in the background. Every breath felt like a dull blade carving meat. But the broom in Alexander's hands never stopped the scripture. Pavilion was not only a forbidden place where Azure Cloud Sect stored cultivation methods, it was also a graveyard for discarded thoughts. Low-tier cultivation notes and broken fragments that intersect disciples treated like trash lay abandoned in dusty corners. To cultivators it was worthless garbage. To Alexander it was the only weapon he had in this brutal world. He did not sweep without purpose. As a menial he was ignored, like dust in the rafters. That gave him perfect cover a few days ago. He passed the martial arena. He forced down his killing intent toward Xianxia. He did not lower his head in fear like everyone else. He burned every sword move into memory. That steward's senior brother who humiliated him struck with vicious force. But in the instant his sword swept past his shoulder, his right arm always hesitated for the faintest heartbeat. It was not a habit, it was a fatal sore spot. Alexander searched through stacks of yellowing scraps. For 3 full days at last, his gaze stopped on a tattered fragment called Miscellany on reverse meridian flow. The record was clear. When chi flow passes Tianquan acupoint and meets resistance, the Zhenjing acupoint must be clogged. Strike 3 kun under the armpit, and the spirit chi will fall into chaos. In the light case, the target will be paralyzed. In the heavy case, the target will suffer chi deviation and fall into madness. That single line matched Xianxia flaw perfectly. A cold calculation flashed through Alexander's deep blue eyes. He did not need to dirty his own hands. This sect had plenty of people who wanted Xianxia dead. Intersect disciple Li Wei and Xianxia had long been at each other's throats over spirit stone quota. Li Wei was the sharpest blade in reach. At dusk, Alexander timed Li Wei returned from the martial arena. Down to the breath he dragged a heavy basket of books along the corridor. At the turn where Li Wei had to pass, he pretended his strength gave out. He stumbled and fell hard. The scrap with the page corner carefully folded slid out with a spill. It landed in the middle of the path where it could not be missed. After that he gathered the rest of the mess. Fast he slipped into shadow like a startled mouse. He pressed his breathing down to nothing. He left only the bait lying still in the last warm light of the setting sun. Moments later, Li Wei's figure appeared at the far end of the long hall. He meant to kick the book aside without looking. Then his eyes caught the words on the page about meridian weak points. His foot stopped. Alexander watched from behind a distant pillar. Li Wei's face shifted from bored to hungry. As if he had found treasure, he glanced around once he stuffed the scrap into his robe in a single smooth motion. A venomous smile crept onto his mouth. The hunter had stepped into the snare. The uneven hunt had begun. The air over the outer sect martial arena turned sharp and deadly. Today was the monthly routine evaluation. Steward senior brother Xianxia stood with his hands behind his back, drinking in the fearful looks around him. A cold laugh cut through the quiet intersect disciple. Li Wei pushed through the crowd. His long sword lifted and pointed straight at Xianxia. He demanded a fight in a clear, loud voice. Xianxia's eyes flashed with contempt. In the past, Li Wei had always lost to him. To challenge him in public today looked like begging for humiliation. The fight exploded at once. Xianxia opened with Azure Cloud windbreaking sword. She howled and bit the air. He meant to crush Li Wei within 3 moves and reassert his authority. In any normal bout, Li Wei would have dodged and yielded ground. But today Li Wei met the blade head-on. At the instant Xianxia swung, the sword passed his shoulder. Old force had not fully faded, and new force had not fully formed. A gap opened. For a heartbeat, Li Wei's eyes lit like steel catching sun. His sword shot forward. Like a venomous snake, he did not aim for a vital spot. He drove hard into the opening 3 kun under the armpit. The thrust was vicious and precise. It struck the exact chi blockage point from the discarded nodes. Xianxia felt a violent sour numbness rip through the meridians of his right arm. Spiritual power that had flowed smoothly turned sluggish. In an instant, the sword move warped in midair. His body lost its support, as if bones had been pulled out. He stumbled forward and almost collapsed. The sight was so absurd it looked like a bad joke. The crowd around the arena broke into laughter. They could not hold back. Xianxia forced himself upright. His face flushed red, then drained white, then swelled into a dark ugly color. Shame burned through his reason like wildfire. He roared and relied on his deep chi, refining 6-layer cultivation. He blasted Li Wei back by sheer brute force. The messy counterattack showed how rattled he was. Li Wei retreated and conceded, but his eyes stayed full of mockery, because from this day on everyone would know Xianxia had a fatal soft spot. Xianxia's chest heaved. His gaze turned poisonous as it swept the crowd, searching for whoever leaked his weakness. He found nothing. The fury that had nowhere to go slammed onto the corner, Where a strand of gold stood out, Alexander was there with his head down, sweeping the stone steps with a blank face. Junkie stormed over and drove a heavy kick into Alexander's chest. Alexander flew several meters and hit the ground hard. Junkie pointed at him and screamed that since Alexander arrived, nothing had gone right under countless eyes. He blamed today's disgrace on the bad luck of this outsider. He even drew his sword and carved a deep trench into the ground. Beside Alexander's face, he promised he would make Alexander disappear. Alexander swallowed the pain and made no sound. His lowered lashes hid the cold mockery in his blue eyes. This beating was the price he had already counted. And Junke's loss of control proved the lofty steward was nothing more than a puppet Alexander could pull by the strings under the soaring dome of Deacon Hall. The air felt frozen solid. Junke knelt on smooth blue stone slabs. He pointed at Alexander, who was pinned down by 2 law enforcement disciples. He accused him with absolute certainty of having a twisted heart. He claimed Alexander dared to hide near the bathing place of intersect women and spy on them. It was an absurd lie. With Alexander's status as a menial and his cultivation almost at zero, he could not even approach the edge of the intersect grand formation. Sneaking into a restricted ground was even more impossible. Yet the deacon elder on the grand chair did not lift his eyelids once he toyed with a jade slip in his hand. His expression stayed flat and cold enough to chill bone to an elder holding life and death. The truth did not matter. What mattered was that an intersect disciple reputation could not be stained. The easiest way to end the noise was to erase the strange source of the dispute. In his eyes, Alexander's life was worth less than a cheap stick of burning incense. Approved. The elder spoke 2 words like brushing dust from a sleeve. Punished to guard the spirit bone abyss for 1 month. Life and death are up to fate. Junke's mouth curled into a cruel grin. Spirit bone abyss was the forbidden ground where azure cloud sect dumped abandoned pill sludge and feral beasts. Corpses death key filled at yin. Miasma burrowed into the body. A mortal who entered would turn into a puddle of pus within 3 days, and that was before facing the wraiths born from resentment at the bottom. This was not guarding, this was execution. No one allowed Alexander a single word of defense. The 2 law enforcement disciples hauled him up like a dead dog. They sped toward the rear mountain restricted grounds without slowing. The deeper they went, the thinner the spirit chi became. In its place came bone-chilling wind and a dim gray fog. Moments later, they dragged Alexander to the edge of a broken cliff. Below was bottomless darkness. Thick gray mist boiled and rolled like a mouth ready to swallow prey. A shrieking wind howled up from the depths. Junke stood at the rim and looked down at Alexander's pale face. He lowered his voice into a mocking whisper. Do not blame senior brother for being ruthless. In your next life, when you reincarnate, remember to keep your eyes open. Then Junke shoved hard. Alexander's body went lightweight, vanished in an instant. He dropped toward endless darkness and death. The roar of wind stuffed his ears. As he fell, he stared up at the patch of sky that kept shrinking. The last trace of fantasy about the immortal sect shattered completely. There was no justice here, only naked cannibalism. Violent pain nearly tore through every nerve in Alexander's body. He did not shatter on impact, because what caught him was not hard rock, but an endless layer of corpses several jong deep. Rotting stench mixed with the smell of blood flooded his nose and almost choked him to death on the spot. This was the bottom of Spirit Bone Abyss. It was the filthiest outlet hidden beneath the polished face of Azure Cloud Sect. It was packed with the waste of cultivation, failures across 1,000 years, and the wronged souls of those who died in vain. There was not a trace of light, only scattered will-o-wisps flickered faintly between white bones. What moved through the air was not the gentle spirit chi of the outside world. It was chaotic astral gale, a savage as blades. After only a brief moment in the open air, Alexander's skin split into many thin bloody cuts far away. The gray mist suddenly churned and roared like a beast. A deadly spiritual power storm was taking shape. If it swallowed him, a mortal body would be ground into minced flesh. In an instant, the instinct to survive crushed fear and nausea. Alexander forced down the violent spasms in his stomach. He clawed with hands and feet at the corpses under him. He dug like a maggot, burrowing only to stay alive. Thick corpse slime soaked through his clothes. Cold, stiff, severed limbs brushed his cheeks. He did not dare stop until he buried himself under several layers of corpses. Only then could he block the deadly storm in that suffocating core of darkness. In deathly silence, his fingertips suddenly touched a strange dry skeleton. Unlike the rotten bones around it that crumbled at a touch, this skeleton felt warm and jade-like. Even after ages, it was still unnaturally tough. The skeleton stayed curled up, finger bones clenched, a cracked cyan jade slip, as if it would guard its secret to the very end. Alexander grabbed the jade slip without thinking. A faint lingering remnant spirit sense surged into his mind at once. With no warning, a vast and crazed flood of information detonated. In his awareness, it was not a cultivation method. It was not a dying message. It was a desperate image record of the truth of the world. In that image he saw the so-called immortal realm. It was not a land of bliss. It was countless bloody jaws high above the 9 heavens. There were no merciful immortals or Buddhas. There was only an unnameable colossal shadow. The recorder called those higher dimensional existences heaven thieves. The land of Juzhou was nothing more than giant pasture grounds marked out by the heaven thieves. The so-called sects were carefully managed slaughter lines. The so-called spirit roots in cultivation were only feed additives meant to make the meat more delicious and rich with power. What mortals saw as ascension and becoming an immortal meant only that the livestock had been fattened. It was ready to be sent out and served on the table for 10,000 years. Countless peerless cultivators charged one after another toward Heaven Gate. They believed it was a stairway to eternal life. In truth, they were jumping into the dinner plate of the predators. This was the truth of the pasture epoch. Deep in the pile of corpses, Alexander shook hard. It was not from cold. It was a tremor rising out of his soul. He once thought he had been ground down into an ant in the dust. Only now did he understand this vast pasture, whether an elder high above or a menial as low as him. They were all lambs waiting for the knife. The only difference was how soon they would be sent out in the darkness. Those deep blue eyes snapped open. The last trace of longing for cultivation shattered. In its place rose a nearly mad cold hatred that wanted to burn down this entire slaughterhouse. Beside the nameless dry skeleton, Alexander made a decision that could shake the world. He stopped trying to use thin spiritual power to resist the astral gale that cut like knives. He followed the reverse cultivation method recorded in the jade slip. He opened every pore in his body. He swallowed the chaotic energy that could erode bone and shred soul. The first mouthful of gray fog entered him like countless tiny razors. In an instant, his organs churned and bled as if stirred to pulp. Blue-black veins bulged across his skin. Then his skin split open inch by inch. The pain was so fierce he nearly bit through his teeth. A dying rasp tore out of his throat like a beast at the edge of death. Yet the madness in his eyes did not fade. He clung to the obsession of revenge. He forced that destructive power to scour every part of him. Each time muscle tore, it rebuilt itself. Each time bone cracked, it reshaped itself. The pale, fragile human skin peeled away. Layer by layer, in its place grew a dull gray keratin hide. With a cold metallic sheen, it was tough like leather. It could block harm in this abyss filled with poison and astral gale. That inhuman torment lasted 3 full days. When Alexander opened his eyes again, something had changed deep inside them. The blue in his pupils carried an eerie dark green glow. In the black bottom of spirit bone abyss, they looked like will-o-wisp fire. He was no longer an immortal seeker chasing elegance and long life. He was a different kind of creature shaped by hell. Hunger surged over him like a rising tide. His stomach felt like a bottomless pit. Then a soft scraping came from behind a mound of white bones. A bloodthirsty corpse, rat the size of a young calf, had caught the scent of living flesh. It was a common mutated feral beast of the abyss. Rotten meat clung to its fangs. Its eyes burned red. If this were the old Alexander, he would already be food. Now he only lowered his body in silence. The muscles along his back rose like a compressed spring. The instant the corpse rat lunged, Alexander moved. There was no fancy technique. There was only pure, violent speed. His body flashed forward fast enough to leave a blurred afterimage. Those hands, hardened by callus, clamped with perfect accuracy around the beast's throat. A sharp crack burst out as the neck bone shattered. The feral beast did not even manage to scream. Alexander tore into its hide with his fingertips. He swallowed the hot, stinking blood and the dense meat in great mouthfuls. As it hit his belly, a brutal heat rushed through him. It filled the emptiness in his exhausted body. He wiped the blood from his mouth. He lifted his head toward the distant sliver of sky far above. A hunter of the abyss had been born. When his fangs were honed razor sharp, he would kill his way back to the surface. Dawn broke over Azure Cloud Sect like a pale blade. Outer Sect Plaza was already packed with people. Today was the day of the sect tournament registration. Stewart's senior brother John K stood at the registration desk in a clean robe. His face still carried the faint swelling from the shame he suffered in public, but his posture was once again arrogant. A long roster was spread across the desk. A menial held it down with both hands while another dipped a calligraphy brush in ink. Outer Sect disciples lined up in waves. They spoke loudly about ranking and rewards. Their eyes held hunger for spirit stones and status. To them, the sect tournament was a ladder. To Alexander, it was a gate that led back to the surface. His body moved through the mourning crowd. Wrapped in a ragged cloak, no one looked twice at a menial. No one imagined the thing walking among them had been reforged in spirit bone abyss. Under the cloak, keratin hide hugged his skin like a second layer of armor. The abyss stench was gone. Only a faint coldness clung to him. Like shadow, he kept his head low. He kept his breathing even he approached the registration desk at the exact moment Jiang turned to bark at someone else. Alexander stepped close enough for the ink smell to hit his nose. He spoke in calm Jujo speech. "Register me." The line froze for a heartbeat. Then laughter burst out from every direction. "A menial wants to register for the sect tournament." Someone slapped his knee like they had heard the funniest Joe. Cake of the year. Jiang slowly turned back when he saw that strand of gold under the hood. His eyes narrowed. The hatred that had been boiling for weeks surged up. "So you are still alive?" He leaned forward. His voice dropped into a poisonous whisper that only those closest could hear. "I sent you to Spirit Bone Abyss to rot." "How did you crawl back out?" Alexander did not answer. He only lifted his face slightly, those deep blue eyes met. Jiang stared without flinching for a fraction of a breath. Jiang felt his scalp prickle. It was like he was being watched by a feral beast that had learned to hide its fangs. Jiang forced down that discomfort and sneered, "You are a menial with no spirit root. What right do you have to stand here? Get out before I break your legs." Alexander's voice stayed flat. "The rules say anyone below Foundation Establishment realm can enter." Jiang face twisted. He glanced at the roster as if searching for a loophole. The sect tournament rules were set by the sect master. Even he could not openly violate them in front of so many eyes. His lips tightened into a thin line. "Fine, register him. Let him crawl onto the arena and die in public." The menial with the calligraphy brush hesitated. Jiang slammed his palm on the desk. Ink splashed. Write his name." The brush tip trembled as it touched the roster. Alexander watched the black strokes form his name in that moment. The first step out of the abyss locked into place around him. People still laughed. They did not know that the thing they mocked had already chosen his prey, and the first name carved into his heart was Jiang. The arena platform at the center of the martial arena was covered by a formation. The stands around it were packed with outer sect disciples who came to watch for fun. When the deacon elder read out the name, Alexander, a harsh wave of laughter swept the whole place. Standing across from him was Jiang number 1 lackey. Jiao Lu wore a cleaned out robe. He twirled his long sword into a pretty sword flower. The sword tip AI met straight at Alexander's expressionless face. He did not rush to attack. He glanced down with pride toward Jiang in the crowd. Then he formed hand seals with one hand and muttered a chant as the spell words flowed. A faint green light rose along the blade. This was the greenwood sword art that outer sect disciples bragged about. Jiao Lu clearly wanted to humiliate this outsider in front of everyone. He deliberately dragged out the long lead up to show off the weight of spiritual power. Jiao Lu sneered that today he would show this outsider trash what real immortal arts look like. He did not even finish the sentence. He did not even finish the complicated opening form. Alexander, who had stood like a stone statue, moved. There was no spiritual power ripple. There was no warning at all. Alexander's legs exploded with force. The blue stone under his feet cracked into a spiderweb of fractures. In everyone's eyes, that ragged figure seemed to vanish from the spot. Only a blurred gray afterimage remained down in Spirit Bone Abyss. There was no polite exchange of turns. There was only the instant trade of life and death against the Abyss Hunters. One extra word meant death. One extra useless motion also meant death. A blast of wind hit Jiao Lu in the face. His pupils shrank hard as he realized that scarred face was already pressed to his nose. He tried to swing his sword on instinct, but the cultivator reflex that depended on spirit sense and incantations was slow like a joke in front of pure flesh born killing instinct. A huge hand covered in dark callus clamped down on Jiao Lu's sword wrist. Like an iron vice, a sharp bone crack rang out across the silent platform. Jiao Lu's wrist bent backward at a twisted 90-degree angle. White bone splinters punched through skin and hung in the air. He still did not have time to scream. Alexander's knee slammed into his lower belly. A heavy thud sounded. Jiao Lu arched like a cooked shrimp. His eyes bulged out. Blood mixed with sour fluid sprayed from his mouth. Onto the ground, Alexander stayed expressionless. He flicked his arm once. He tossed the unconscious Jiao Lu off the arena platform like a bag of trash. From start to finish, it took only one breath. The whole place fell into dead silence. All the taunts people had prepared jammed in their throats and turned into stunned swallowing. There was no dazzling sword light. There was no roaring spiritual pressure. There was only the most primitive, most savage, most efficient violence. Alexander stood at the center of the arena platform, with both hands lowered. Those dull green eyes swept across the frozen crowd. He looked like a lone wolf that had walked into a flock of sheep. He was calmly judging the next piece of fresh meat. Jiang leaped onto the arena platform. With a face like cold iron, he did not even wait for the referee to speak. His longsword whipped up 3 razor wind blades. They screamed straight for Alexander's vital points. This was the outer sect high-tier martial technique, rending wind / if it hit true, a mortal would die for sure. Alexander did not take it head on. His body twisted in a strange way like a dead leaf in wind. He barely slipped past the killing edge. Then in stiff Jujo speech he said, "Is that all you have?" The contempt in that voice was like salt ground into Jiang Pride, the steward's senior brother who loved to bully slowly others instantly went red-eyed. He drove his spiritual power without restraint sword light. Poured down like storm rain, he meant to chop this outsider into pieces. Alexander moved inside the airtight sword. His gaze stayed calm like a precise instrument. He was waiting for the moment he had already calculated. Xianxia roared and swung again and again. His spiritual power surged and his moves grew wilder. At that instant, a brief fault line appeared in his chi flow. Old force had not faded, and new force had not formed. His old injury made his right side expose itself by instinct. Now Alexander stepped in close. His right hand became a palm blade. It chopped down with a howling rush of wind. It struck the deadly chi stagnation point. A dull, heavy sound burst out. Xianxia's spiritual power reversed at once. Meridian pain exploded through him. He screamed and collapsed like rotten mud. White foam spilled from his mouth. Not a trace of his usual arrogance remained. Victory and defeat were decided. Alexander was about to turn away. Then a vast pressure slammed down from above. His bones creaked under it. The deacon elder on the stands was furious. He slammed the table hard. He accused Alexander of using demonic sect forbidden art and trampling sect law. He gave no one a chance to speak on the spot. He cancelled Alexander's sect tournament qualification. He stripped away Alexander's menial status. He ordered Alexander thrown into the water press on to await judgment. Law enforcement disciples swarmed in from every side. They shoved heavy shackles onto Alexander with brutal force. Facing this black-white twisted verdict, Alexander did not howl innocence. He did not try to argue. He slowly raised his head. Through his messy blonde hair, his eerie green eyes locked on the elder above. A mocking cold smile lifted at the corner of his mouth. He had known it from the start. In this world, so-called righteous path was only a fig leaf for the strong doing as they please, and this carefully built slaughterhouse had finally shown him its fangs. Azure Cloud Sect water prison was so cold, it felt like it could freeze bone. Filthy black water rose to Alexander's chest. The rot stench made the throat want to heave. Two thick black iron chains hung him in the air. Long soaking had turned his skin a sick pale white, but he did not wail like the other prisoners. Instead, he began a carefully staged solo performance of madness. Sometimes he howled complicated physics formulas in English. Sometimes he mumbled in broken Jujo speech about ascension shortcuts and ancient remnant formations. Those words were hooked bait. They flew straight into the ears of guards who hungered for power in this rigid cultivation world. No secret spreads faster than a shortcut to a realm breakthrough. In less than half a day, the heavy stone door of the water prison opened with a deep roar. A middle-aged man in a robe, trimmed in purple gold, stepped across the water spirit. Chi surged around him and forced the filthy black water back 3 chi. He was the Azure Cloud Sect master, a desperate man trapped at Foundation establishment. Peak for 30 years without a single step forward. His bloodshot eyes locked on Alexander. He looked at him like a rare treasure, not an outsider. Captive Alexander immediately showed extreme terror. His body shook hard, the chains clattered and rang under the sect master crushing pressure. He curled into a ball. He begged in a babbling mess. Then under harsh questioning, he stammered out the so-called secret. He lied that his homeland had a spirit gathering matrix that could forcefully see spirit chi from heaven and earth. With trembling fingers, he carved a strange diagram into the wet slick rock wall. It was only a counterfeit he stitched together from earth geometry and broken formation, scraps he secretly saw in the scripture pavilion. But in the eyes of a sect master desperate for a breakthrough, those unseen lines felt deep and profound. The sect master breathing grew fast. His greedy gaze crawled across the diagram again and again. Alexander caught the brief moment of distraction. Then he threw out the final bait with a shaking voice. He said the formation was tyrannical but extremely unstable. He said it required a soul from another world as the formation core sacrificed to suppress the violent spirit chi. At those words, all doubt vanished from the sect master's eyes. Joy replaced it like wildfire. Soul from another world was not that the useless thing right in front of him. The heavenly Tao truly favored him. It had delivered the perfect offering. The sect master laughed wildly and withdrew his pressure. His eyes swept over Alexander with contempt like he was looking at a pig waiting for slaughter. He ordered Alexander taken out of the water prison and watched closely. Once the formation was set, they would carry out the sacrifice. When the stone door slammed shut, darkness swallowed the cell again. The fear on Alexander's face vanished. At once coldness returned like a mask. Snapping into place, he slowly lifted his head. Those eerie green eyes held not a ripple. Greed was the finest hallucinogen. The hunter had already bitten the poison bait. Now all that remained was to wait for the poison to take hold. Night wrapped Azure Cloud Sect in deep shadow skyreach. Altar hung above Azure Cloud peak. Clouds and mist rolled around it like a greedy mouth waiting to feed. The sect master stood at the formation hub in a purple gold dharma robe. 12 core elders sat in a circle, every face burned with fanatic hunger for realm breakthrough. In eternal life, Alexander was tied bare-chested to the stone pillar. At the center, he was the so-called otherworld formation core. The sect master roared a command. Thousands of high-grade spirit stones shattered in the same instant. Vast spirit chi surged like a river, forced to flow backward. It rushed along the strange twisted geometric patterns carved into the ground. The sect master felt power pour into his meridians like nothing he had known. The foundation establishment bottleneck loosened in a blink. He threw his head back and laughed toward the sky. His eyes were filled with the obsession of imminent ascension. Right as he prepared to devour that energy completely, Alexander suddenly lifted his eyes. Those eerie green pupils held no dullness at all. They were dead quiet and ice cold. A mocking curve rose at the corner of his mouth. His mind hooked the reverse spirit sigil. Buried deep in his flesh and blood, the formation light that had been flowing clockwise froze in place. Then it erupted and reversed with a piercing scream. The orderly spiritual power cycle was smashed apart in an instant. The sect master laughter locked on his face. Terror surged through him as he felt the change. The spiritual power in his body was no longer under control. It was being ripped away by the formation like a flood through a broken dam. Not only his spiritual power, his blood essence was being dragged out. His lifespan was being dragged out. Even his soul was being torn by that horrible suction. A shriek ripped across the sky before every eye. The sectmaster body shriveled at terrifying speed. Then he burst apart like an overfilled balloon. The 12 elders were next. The spiritual power links between them became death fuses. They had no chance to flee. Dull explosions thudded again and again. They turned into blood mist that sprayed across the altar. A massive shockwave swept outward. The mountain guarding grand formation shattered like glass piece by piece. Azure Cloud Sect, proud 1,000-year foundation, collapsed into ruins. In one moment, when the dust-thin Skyreach altar had become a slaughter ground, only the stone pillar at the formation core still stood tall. Alexander slowly snapped the shackles that had already lost their spiritual support. Among shredded flesh and severed limbs, he picked up the sect leader. Jade slipped. The sect master left behind. He did not look back once toward the mountain below. Former sectmates were screaming and scattering in panic. He tucked the jade slip against his body. His face did not change. He stepped over what remained of the sect master without a glance. The sunset burned red like blood. It pulled his shadow long across the broken stone. This blonde, blue-eyed outsider walked over the corpses of cultivators. He walked alone onto a road destined to be choked with thorns. A god-slaying road. A road to end the pasture epoch that feeds on all beings.